Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Gareth Vaughan and I'm joined by Debnath Guharoy, who is the Regional Director for Asia Pacific at Roy Morgan Research. Debnath, it's the second year you've done these Consumer Satisfaction Awards for New Zealand. In the Financial Institution of the Year and the Major Bank of the Year categories, the same entities have won again. Can you tell us who they are and perhaps a little bit of as to why they seem to be so popular with their customers?
It might be a good idea to pull back a little and look at what's happening around the world. We've gone through decades of globalization, and as a result, standards have risen around the world, including New Zealand, including in Australia. But with the global financial crisis, I think as people everywhere, we're tending to look inwards. There are people who've traveled, worked with the big global banks, learnt and come back home, and they're lifting the game. Now, if you look at standards in Australia, the big four Australian banks are setting records year after year. They're getting better with customer satisfaction. This is true in New Zealand as well. The game's lifted, but I think we're also everywhere becoming more nationalistic. And if we're satisfied with something that is homegrown and home-owned, there is an affinity, I think, an instinct to support it. And unless there is something very serious to complain about, we tend not to complain about what we call our own. I can't in any way prove with hard numbers that this is the fact, but there are other indicators within the research that we do continuously that would lead me to say that this is what is happening in countries as diverse as New Zealand and Indonesia. You're seeing a greater sense of pride, a greater sense of confidence in what is local than what used to be, say, 10 years ago.
So the Financial Institution of the Year is again SBS Bank, and the Major Bank of the Year is Kiwi Bank. So being New Zealand companies and New Zealand owned has certainly helped them?
I'm pretty sure that has a lot to do with it. Now, I can tell you, coming back 10 years, 9 years later, one of the first clients that I signed on in my term in this office here was Kiwi Bank. At that time, it was a fledgling idea of a bank. And I'm delighted that it is now such a large New Zealand-owned organization and supported by so many Kiwis who are so satisfied year after year. Because, as you might know, Kiwi Bank in 2011 were the most highly rated customer satisfaction bank for all 12 months of the year. This year, they've done it 11 months out of 12. And I think it has a lot to do with two senses of pride. One, the management and executive and staff of the bank are proud of what they do every day. And the people they serve, large numbers of Kiwis from all walks of life, are satisfied with the level of service they're getting. So the game's lifted, and it's lifted for the locals as well. And that's fantastic.
And in terms of the overall levels of customer satisfaction, I guess firstly across the financial institutions, because that includes insurers and some finance company type entities, I guess like GE, and also across the major banks, which are a slightly different scenario. How are those overall customer satisfaction levels doing? I mean, is there quite a narrow range? And how does customer satisfaction in that area compare in New Zealand to other countries?
I think within financial services, there's a difference in the nature of the business. So where you put your money, if you're treated with respect and courtesy and it's secure, you have very little reason to complain. If the statements come on time, there's accuracy, and the lady at the counter, when you go to a branch, and very few people are going to branches nowadays, you have New Zealand in the 80s, I think 84, 85 is where the top rated banks are in terms of customer satisfaction. When you look at the financial institutions, including insurance, you see a very big difference. Because the nature of the insurance business is not something that most people warm up to. It's like a necessary evil. You sort of give the money begrudgingly. And if you can pick a hole, you will. So it's the nature of the business. Insurance is, in that sense, a tougher business to be in. If you look at niche markets, if you look at the smaller banks, they're actually higher rated, even more highly rated than the big four. And that's because they're almost like community banks. They're like credit unions. And it helps them to be small, to be able to keep an eye at a personalized level at the branch level. And so they rate even higher. But I think the common theme that we're seeing for both last year and this year is Kiwi is good.
And why does customer satisfaction matter?
It's the holy grail of any service business. If you have satisfied customers, you keep them. If you have unhappy customers, the desire to look elsewhere is instinctively high. So if it gets painful, you will walk. If it's comfortable, respectful, courteous, reassuring, trustworthy, those are the words for any industry, then you keep them. So whether it's an airline, whether it's a bank, whether it's a department store, a supermarket, if you've got happy customers, they'll keep coming back. And so that's the reason why.
And is the development of social media and the widespread use of that now, is that having much of an impact on all of this?
I think every institution now has to be careful. There was a time where you could handle media more cleverly than you can now. Whether it's the Arab Spring or whether it's what your wife or your girlfriend had as an experience tonight, is all over her page and her friends, and you can't put the lid on it. And I think that's the truth. In terms of managing media, it's so much more of a challenge. And that really means that the more satisfied your customers are, the less complaints you have, less opportunity for people to spread a revolution.
You've also come out with a figure that only a third of New Zealanders are comfortable giving credit card details over the internet. Now, that's sort of lower than I would have expected, given, I guess, the increase in purchases online that New Zealanders are making now. Why do you think that is? I mean, obviously security is a key reason. Is there anything else to it? And how does that compare to figures overseas?
It'll vary very differently. So, for example, if you compare New Zealand to Australia, very similar levels of concern and very similar levels of internet usage of credit cards. But what has happened in both countries is a dramatic rise of the online business. We're talking 6 billion thereabouts for New Zealand. Now, the rate of climb is huge, from a tenth 10 years ago to 6 billion today. Now, despite the reservations that people have about credit cards, they're buying more on the internet, also taking comfort from services like PayPal. So where you have an account, you feel more secure. If people are buying regularly from the same store, they're more comfortable giving that reliable store a number, which is their credit card number. So I think the numbers are declining. The number of people who are conscious or worried about using their cards online, that number is declining, will continue to decline as technology standards improve. So we can all rest assured that for the foreseeable future, the kind of climb you're seeing in the online business sector, that'll continue to grow.
Now,
for a decade probably.
Your survey obviously covers a whole range of industries, not just the banking financial services one. What industries are customers most satisfied with, and which ones are they least satisfied with?
I think, going back to what we were saying earlier, those businesses where we form an emotional relationship tend to be the ones that we are either most satisfied with, or if it's painful, we get upset. So for example, your relationship with your car is probably a good one. And with technology standards going up every 6 months in the automotive industry, you've got something as personal as a car with very high standards of satisfaction levels. And if you go right down to the end, you get to those things that you're a little distant from, such as insurance, where you give the money because you have to.
And in terms of the awards across the different sectors, which sector was competition fiercest?
Cars, banking, very tough. Airlines, very tough. But as you go away on the impersonal score, people's expectations are lower, scores are generally lower. So cars are very high, very, very competitive. And because the game's lifted for the newcomers, or the relative newcomers like a Kia or a Hyundai, standards are higher, levels of satisfaction are higher, because technology has become so much better and getting better constantly.
I'm just interested in you've got awards across a whole range of industries.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, in which industry did you have the most comprehensive winner?
You mean by a long margin?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what tends to happen is that when you have a very competitive sector like banking, or a very competitive sector like automotive, the margins are narrow. When it's a smaller field, like let's say supermarkets, where there aren't 15 big names, the margins are wider. So you could have an airline with a 0.5 edge, a car with a 0.2 edge, as has been the case. I think it's where people's expectations are higher and where there are a large number of players, the standards are higher, satisfaction standards are higher.
And in terms of the coffee shop of the year, we were a little bit surprised to see Starbucks winning that category.
Right.
What do you think counted in Starbucks' favour there? What got it over the line?
I think the first thing we need to recognize is Starbucks, the Gloria Jeans, the global names, they are spread out across the country, but you could have a very good cafe right next to your home, right next to your office, and that doesn't get picked up because it's not a brand. So I think we need to be fair to the mom and pop stores, the small cafes who do a very good job and serve a very good cup of coffee. You have Starbucks winning here. That isn't what happened in Australia, because in Australia, Starbucks have found entry in cracking that market a lot more difficult. So guess who wins in Australia? It's Michelle's Patisserie, which is a small outlet typically in shopping malls, but they're all over the place, but it's a local business. And again, it's the nature of the game that determines who's winning and who's losing. I think you'd get a very good cup of coffee 2 blocks down the road.
Right downstairs from here, in fact.
Right, there you go.
And look, just in terms of trends perhaps that you're watching at Roy Morgan, or that we should watch as consumers over the next year or so, anything in particular that you'd highlight?
I think there are 2 things that stand out in terms of where we're headed. I think the digital world that we live in will continue to influence change. Look at the numbers in terms of internet penetration. 10 years ago in New Zealand, roughly 10% of New Zealand homes had internet at home. Now it's like 85, thereabouts. If you look at people buying things online, that's changing the game for brick and mortar. It is scary. If you were a major retailer, 20 years old and older, you'd be worried about how to shift your dynamic. So I think as far as the consumer economy goes, the internet, the digital world, the things that we can do with ever smarter phones will continue to influence life, will continue to influence business big time. Whether it's banking or whether it's something on your car as you drive up the highway in the middle of nowhere, GPS, internet will continue to change our lives. That's at our own local level. I think the bigger backdrop is equally powerful, and that's the global stage we're all a part of. If Europe does not get out of the troubles it is in, if the American economy remains at a sluggish 1.5, the potential for New Zealand business to grow just automatically slows down, because we're all part of a global economy. Luckily for New Zealand and for Australia, we're plugged into Asia, and that's the engine of growth. So we've got to be cognizant as businesses that the opportunities at home should not in any way blur our horizons just across the water in Asia. And the more businesses that integrate with Asia have a better chance of lifting domestic economies. So I think those are the two most powerful things that we see. The digital world and its continuing influence, and the way the global economy is going to either correct itself or not, and the greater importance for countries like New Zealand and Australia to keep looking at Asia.